If you've ever caught yourself thinking, why do I feel guilty when I procrastinate? You're not alone. For many people, procrastination isn't just frustrating, it's followed by something else: guilt. The longer the task sits unfinished, the heavier that guilt becomes. And here's the strange part. You might assume that guilt should motivate you, that feeling bad about procrastinating should push you to finally start the work. But in reality, the opposite often happens. Guilt doesn't break procrastination, it strengthens it. In this video, we're going to explore why you feel guilty when you procrastinate, how that guilt actually keeps the stress response active in the brain, and why that stress makes it harder, not easier, to start the work. Because once you understand this loop, you stop trying to motivate yourself through guilt and you start breaking the cycle instead. When people talk about procrastination, they usually focus on behaviour, putting things off, delaying work, avoiding tasks. But underneath that behaviour, there is almost always an emotion: pressure, overwhelm, uncertainty, or fear of doing something badly. When the brain perceives those signals, it becomes cautious. Starting the task suddenly feels heavier than it did before, so avoidance appears. At this point, procrastination is actually doing something useful. It's helping your nervous system regulate discomfort. But then something else enters the picture: judgment. You notice the avoidance and you tell yourself something like, I shouldn't be doing this, I'm wasting time, I need to get my act together. And that judgment creates guilt. Guilt is a very strong emotion. From an evolutionary perspective, guilt plays an important role in social behavior. It helps us repair mistakes. It pushes us to take responsibility. But guilt becomes harmful when it turns inward and becomes self-criticism. Instead of motivating action, it creates stress. Your brain interprets guilt as a signal that something has gone wrong, and that activates the stress response. Heart rate increases, threat detection becomes stronger, the brain becomes more cautious. This is really helpful if you're responding to danger, but not if you're trying to start a piece of work, because stress narrows the brain's ability to think clearly. Here's the loop that most people get stuck in. You delay a task, then you notice the delay, that triggers guilt. The guilt activates stress, and stress increases the brain's perception of threat around the work. So the task now feels even heavier than it did before, which makes avoidance more likely, so the cycle repeats. Procrastination creates guilt. Guilt increases stress. Stress increases avoidance, and avoidance produces more guilt. This is why procrastination often gets worse the longer a task remains unfinished. Not because the task changed, but because the emotional weight around it keeps increasing. So many people believe guilt should motivate them. They assume that feeling bad about procrastination will push them into action. But motivation doesn't come from shame. Motivation comes from perceived safety and possibility. So when the brain believes a task is manageable, engagement increases. When the brain believes a task is threatening, engagement decreases, and guilt sends a signal to the brain that something is wrong, which increases caution. So instead of increasing motivation, guilt often creates more resistance. This is why people sometimes sit down to work and immediately feel overwhelmed. The task isn't just a task anymore, it's a reminder of everything they think they should have done already. The longer guilt stays active, the longer the stress response stays active. And the stress response changes how the brain processes work. The thinking part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, becomes less dominant. Threat detection becomes more dominant. The brain focuses on risk, not on progress. This is why under stress people often struggle to prioritize, they struggle to make decisions, they find it difficult to start complex tasks because the brain is not optimizing for productivity, it's optimizing for protection. If you want to understand how stress changes the brain's ability to focus and think clearly, I've made a full video about that which I'll link up here and in the description. The key to breaking this cycle is surprisingly simple. Remove guilt from the equation, not by ignoring responsibility, but by changing how you interpret procrastination. Instead of seeing procrastination as a failure, treat it as information. Information that something about the task feels heavy. Maybe the task is unclear. Maybe expectations are too high. Maybe the next step isn't well defined. Once you approach procrastination with curiosity instead of judgment, something important happens. Pressure drops. And when pressure drops, the brain becomes more willing to engage. One of the most useful questions you can ask when procrastination appears is this: what feels heavy about starting this? Sometimes the answer will be obvious: too many steps, too much uncertainty, too much pressure. And once you identify the source of that heaviness, you can adjust the task, you can shrink the entry point, you can clarify the next step, you can lower the expectations. These small changes tell the nervous system something important. This task is manageable. This task is safe to engage with. And when the brain receives that signal, avoidance begins to decrease. If you want to see how shrinking tasks can dramatically reduce procrastination, I've explained that in a video about micro-missions, which I'll link up here and in the description. The real shift is this: procrastination is not the problem. Guilt is not the solution. Both are signals. Signals that the brain is struggling with pressure, uncertainty, or cognitive load. When you respond to those signals by increasing pressure, the cycle just continues. But when you respond by reducing pressure and clarifying the work, momentum often returns naturally. This is why understanding the psychology behind procrastination matters so much, because the moment you stop trying to fight your brain and start working with it, the experience of productivity changes completely. That's what I explore inside the Momentum Reset Method, where you get my ebook, you get me walking you through the whole method. You can find a link for that below. If this video helped you understand why you feel guilty when you procrastinate, the next video I recommend watching is why stress makes you procrastinate. Your brain is protecting you. That video explains how stress trains avoidance patterns in the brain. I've linked it on screen now. You can also explore the full procrastination psychology playlist, where I break down the deeper causes of procrastination and how to build momentum without relying on pressure or discipline. And if you'd like more videos like this, exploring productivity through psychology rather than guilt, consider subscribing, because once you understand how the brain actually works, procrastination becomes much easier to solve.